wish you'd understand. I just wish that God had a better plan. I'm so confused. I need a redo. Inside of me that's begging and begging and pleading. I just wanna feel free. I just wanna feel lovely. I'm surrounded by love that's in pain. Can I wipe your tears away? Please don't hurt for me. I hate that it's for me. It's for me.
Hi, welcome back to the MS Michigan Man 64 podcast, where I am trying to spread awareness about what it is like to live with chronic disease. I've been living with multiple sclerosis for the last 28 years. I talk about my journey as well as the journey of other chronic disease warriors all over the world, just to try to help people to understand what it's like going through that diagnosis, the mental health part of it, the family part, the relationship part, the employment part. Today, I am sitting down with an MSer that I met online. Amy contacted me a couple weeks ago, and she wanted to share her journey about her MS diagnosis in 2012. The really cool thing about Amy is that she is actually a pharmacist. She got her Phar-D degree from the University of Georgia. Go Bulldogs. And she wanted to come on and talk about her journey with her MS. So please welcome to the podcast, Amy. How are you doing today, Amy?
Good. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, go Dogs and also go Blue. My roots are in Michigan, so it's a double win.
Go Blue, go Blue, go Blue, go Dogs. I like that, Amy. So Amy, when you got your diagnosis in 2012, can you just kind of take us through, when you were going through your symptoms and you didn't really understand what was going on, and what made you go to a doctor to try to get it figured out?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at my autoimmune history, when I was in my late teens, I was diagnosed with vitiligo, which a lot of people know as the skin disease that Michael Jackson had. And it presents as white patches on your skin. And, I was 17, didn't think much of it, just kept living. And then in my mid-20s, right around the time of pharmacy school, and I was finishing up, I was diagnosed with a thyroid autoimmune disease. And so knowing what I knew about the human body and about diseases, I started to get this inkling that something was wrong. This is my second autoimmune diagnosis, and I knew enough that they cluster. They are linked to each other. And so more than anything, I started getting this sense of doom, this sense of worry about what could be coming down the road. And what that was multiple sclerosis. I was 27 and I was running at the time. So I was running long distances, getting up into marathon type miles, and I started to have drop foot.
Yeah.
On my right side. And it started happening sooner and sooner, and it started taking longer and longer to recover. And so finally I knew I needed to go get it looked at. And I just had this hunch that it was MS. And like a lot of people, probably other people listening, it wasn't a clear-cut picture. And so I had many doctors say, I don't think this is MS. And no, I don't think we need to scan your brain. And so it just took a little bit of persistence. And I was working in the healthcare system and thankfully knew neurologists and such. And so got the scan, got the lumbar puncture, and did confirm that it was MS. And I think the reason it was throwing people off is that it is more of a primary progressive type picture. And so if you're living with MS, you likely know that they tend to group the diagnoses into these categories, which is a whole other story because they may be going away. But I didn't have these big relapses that then recovered, but instead it's just more of a progression that happens slowly over time.
Yeah. So when you were going through that, and the doctors told you that you had MS, and being that you were in the medical profession, I mean, did you understand the fact that it's chronic, that you're going to have to figure out a way to live with this the rest of your life. I mean, I guess I'm asking like the mental part of it, being that you were in the medical field, how did you understand what was actually being told to you, Amy?
That's a really good question because the answer goes back to I was studying late in the library during pharmacy school with a few friends, and we were studying pathophysiology. So this is the classes where you're learning about every single thing that could go wrong with the body.
Mm-hmm.
And, we're entertaining ourselves. It's midnight and we're getting loopy. And I say to one of my friends, what if you could have, what is the worst case diagnosis for you of any diagnosis? So people are saying different ones, cancers, this or that. And my friend asked me, and I said, MS, multiple sclerosis. And what was wild was that's what I thought of. The moment that I was diagnosed, I thought back to that moment and said, wow, this at one point was my worst case scenario. And I don't even know why I thought that. I didn't have anybody close to me with MS. I had just learned in a textbook what is happening in your nervous system. And it was shock. I knew it was chronic. I knew it was progressive. And in that moment, I truly believed, and this is a big part of my story, because in that moment, I truly believed my life would always be a little bit worse because now I had this diagnosis. There was no going back. There was no almost recovering from something that was so chronic, progressive, neurodegenerative. And we'll likely get into how that has shifted and changed. But yes, in that moment, in that doctor's office, I remember thinking and believing this is a before and after, and the after is not as good as the before.
Yeah. I know when I went through my diagnosis at right around that same age, and I just started to wrap my head around MS because I didn't have any knowledge of it, and I didn't have a medical background or anything like you did. But once I finally started wrapping my head around it, my first thoughts were, I'm screwed. I'm 27 and I'm going to be in a wheelchair by the time I'm 30. 35. I was scared for the rest of my life being as young as I was. And I don't know, like, I think my doctor told me, Brian, you can't look at it like that, because you don't know in 5 years how you're going to be. You gotta live for the day. And he just kind of like told me right off the rip that, you can't just quit on this disease. You got to keep on fighting. And it took me a while to understand what he was saying, but I mean, I lived the rest of my life like that, but I mean, I had my hills and valleys and bad falls, with the mental part of it, because the mental part has always been the hardest part to me, Amy.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I say there are two symptoms that bind all of us. I think that people experience fatigue in different ways, whether it's exhaustion, whether it's physical, mental, but the other symptom that binds all of us is that feeling of uncertainty. And kind of the funny thing about it is all humans have uncertainty. I mean, like, to be a human on this planet, we think that we have more certainty than we actually do. But having a diagnosis of MS almost makes the uncertainty even more obvious and even more front of mind. And so the way you described it, the way I described it, I mean, I think we were experiencing the same emotion and just assigning different words to it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that a lot of people go through that same feeling, especially at a young age, because you were just starting out, you're just starting your pharmaceutical career, being a pharmacist, and you get that thrown at you. And I was in the same position. I was 2 years into my career with the state of Ohio. And then all of a sudden I get this diagnosis, and, it's a eye-opening experience. And a lot of the important part of it are the supports that you have with you. I had a strong family, my mom, and my brother, and I was engaged at the time. So I had my girlfriend to lean on, fiance. And I think that's an important part of it and part of the journey.
Yeah, I was newly married, and I actually had my mom in the office with me because it was her birthday. It was May 3rd, 2012. And I was going to the office, and we made a joke. She's like, you can't get diagnosed with MS on my birthday. I'll go with you. And surely that was not true. But in that moment, the first thing my doctor said to me, and this is a doctor that he diagnosed me, but I did not end up staying with him. But the first thing he said before I even had a chance to wrap my brain around the words was that I needed to start to think about if I wanted to have kids. And I love hearing that your doctor back then, was feeding you more positive thoughts, because I don't think that that's often the case. So yeah, I had support through that, but to complete my story, a few years later, I did end up going through a divorce. And honestly, it was interesting because it put some things in perspective. There was the MS, there was a kind of unexpected, unwanted divorce, and there was a car accident that I was in, all in a matter of these few years. And in some ways, having 3 earthquakes or life quakes like that kind of put each of them in perspective. And from a mental health standpoint, it almost allowed the doom or the heaviness that would have probably just kept being focused on the MS the whole time. It allowed it to dissipate a little bit. And these other things, I realized, oh, just because I have MS doesn't mean that I no longer have to deal with the other huge ups and downs that life has. So yeah, so in a way, it was almost grounding to say, this is just a piece of your story, and you're still going to have to learn how to pick yourself back up when there are blows thrown at you that have nothing to do with MS. It almost took away its power a little bit.
I say that all the time. MS is part of my journey, but I mean, life has gone on. After I got diagnosed in '97, I had my first child. My ex-wife had our first child in '99. Then I had my second in 2001, and my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2001. Life goes on. I mean, and then a few years later, I had back surgery because I have spine issues. So, I mean, it wasn't MS related, but I mean, I have other issues. And later on in life, I had a melanoma, skin cancer. I mean, just because you have MS, life is still going to go on, irregardless of whether or not you like it or not. That you got diagnosed, you got to figure out a way to keep on going because life is still going to go on.
Yeah, and when you look at, I had the diagnosis. I decided to take a disease modifying therapy.
Mm-hmm.
What I knew about the pharmaceuticals and what the studies showed, and I knew, what, I want to give my body the best chance to slow progression, stop progression. I cleaned up my lifestyle quite a bit. So really, I never was super unhealthy but I really looked at what foods am I putting in my body? How am I exercising? I did all of that. And I say that to lead up to, if probably 2-ish years into my diagnosis, if you looked at me and you looked at what I was eating, how I was exercising, you would say, wow, she is the picture of health. She is doing everything she can. But if you peel back my brain and look inside, that uncertainty and that anxiety and that doom of the future was higher than ever. And so with that, I really realized, I need to get some help. I need to look at this. And so went to talk to a psychologist, which helped up until a point. And I went and got benefit, but it really wasn't until I stumbled upon, which I can't even remember. That's how the beauty of, having the internet in our lifetime, where you're like, where did I first learn about this person or hear about this concept? But worked with a coach who really was focused on mindset and teaching me how the power of my thoughts and how feelings aren't just handed to me. I am creating them based on how I'm thinking about things. And so it wasn't until really learning about that skill of really looking at that first thought I told you about of, well, my life will always be worse. And how if I let that be the dominant thought driving my life, and if I let that remain unexamined and a true thought in my life without looking at it and saying, that's bullshit. That does not need to be true. And here's how I can make it not true. And so that is really a shift. If anybody's listening and you're like, wait, that feels really true. It doesn't have to be, and our life is going to look different, but just having the awareness that our thoughts and feelings are not handed to us. They are somewhat under our control. Is such a powering upstream, going to the root cause of what's happening approach, looking at life with this diagnosis.
I agree with you, and it's a lifelong journey just to figure those tools out, Amy. I didn't take the mental health part of my disease very serious in the beginning because I was young and I didn't have the mental capacity to understand that how important the mental part of this journey was. And I was, 27 years old. I just got done playing at Michigan, and I was a big, strong guy. And I'm like, I don't need a psychologist. I don't need an antidepressant. I'm fine. And I did that for 15 years, and it was a big mistake on my part. I struggled, during episodes. I went into a shell, and I just dealt with the disease on my own. I didn't let other people help me, and I think it was a bad mistake on my part. 15 years into it, I lost my ability to work with the state of Ohio, and that's when my mental health really spiraled. And that was the first time I reached out to my doctor and said, hey, I need help. And I wish I would have done it a lot earlier in my journey. I think it would have helped me just handle things better, with how different situations happened in my life. I don't think I handled them as well as I could have.
Well, and I love that you said that it's a lifelong journey because, now when I work with people, and I'm coaching and because I work as a coach living with people living with MS, and it's lifelong. So I know these tools, I use these tools, I teach these tools, I create tools that help for us. But even with that, we are still human. There are still ups and downs. We still relearn the same things over and over. And so for listeners, like if anybody feels like, oh, I should know this by now, or I know I should think positive, it is not natural for us. It's very human. We have a negativity bias that has evolved and kept us safe and kept us alive for a really long time. And learning how to work with our brain and how to actually keep coming back to these things again throughout our entire journey is a skill and a process, and one that people aren't talking enough about. People are kind of silently suffering, thinking that they should be doing it better than they are, instead of really embracing that this is, again, a journey, and asking for support and learning tools to help navigate the days and the weeks and the months and the years is something available and out there. We just have to find an entry point that makes sense for us.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like I said, my mental health started to spiral after I lost my ability to work in 2015. And I think that, early in the disease, when people are still working, that's their identity. That's their purpose for getting up in the morning and existing, is because they got to work. And I think when you lose that ability to work, I think that's when a lot of the mental health struggles really, really kick in, because you lost your identity. But you lost your ability to take care of your family like the way that you used to. And I think that is the part that I wish I would have prepared for. Even though I didn't want it to ever happen, I didn't prepare for the possibility. And I think that was a mistake that I made.
Well, and I think that your predominant, thing that you really wanted to keep was working. A lot of people are, I'll be okay as long as I can keep walking. And then if something happens that impairs mobility, impairs their ability to maintain their independence, then the crash can happen then. So we likely all have this condition or this expectation that whether we call it out or not, that I will be okay as long as I get to still XYZ. So whether it's work, whether it's walk, whether it's do these various things. And the true power and peace comes from being able to know that you are going to be okay, and know that you are going to be able to manage your inner state of your world, independent of any external circumstance. Like that's when you start to feel like I have a superpower. If the things I can't control, because there's a whole lot of things we can't control, if the things I can't control do not define my emotional mental health, I mean, that is where we can really get to a place of feeling more peace.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah.
And the thing is, Amy, I had to figure this out. After I lost my ability to work, I went through a 2-year period, and but I had to find tools to occupy my mind. Originally, when I first lost my ability, it was a stupid game on my phone that I would sit there and play just to occupy my time, because
Yeah.
instead of communicating with people all day long like I did for the last 20 years, now I'm staring at four walls, and I'm sitting in silence. So I had to find a way to occupy my mind, and that was the way I did it early on. And I just had to find certain things that, hey, I have an interest in this, and I'm just going to dive into this just to occupy my mind. Some of them were good. Some of them were bad. Some of them I had to throw out and scrap and try over. But that was the part that I focused on. Okay, I'm losing my ability to work, my ability to walk good. And I got to occupy my mind, or I'm going to go crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to think of it. We're driving down the road, and we're on, we're heading towards a destination. So the destination may be, a certain thing in work, a certain thing in your physical ability, a family. All those destinations, really, we're going towards a feeling. So do we want to feel love? Do we want to feel belonging? Do we want to feel accomplishment? Do we want to feel joy? And we get a big old detour thrown in front of us. And I think it's normal for anybody, even the most positive thinkers, even the people who seem to naturally be able to find a different perspective. When that detour gets thrown up, we get blocked. And it's how quick we are able to make the decision. Oh, okay, I see what happened here. Now I got to find my reroute. I got to find the detour to still get to feel all those things that I was heading towards feeling, whether it's belonging, love, accomplishment. And so that moment of, we got to get creative. We accept that we're not willing to give up that feeling that we're going towards, and getting the support we need to get there. Because no matter our physical ability, no matter our diagnosis, there is no feeling that is not accessible to us. Just the way that we get it may be changed by a diagnosis. There is no feeling that you and I, Brian, cannot feel, no matter what happens in this body.
I agree. I agree with you 100%, Amy. A lot of it is just the attitude. You got to try to stay positive with this disease, and it's hard to do. I know I struggled the mental part of just accepting the fact that I had to start using mobility aids. When I started having to use a cane, that was a mental struggle for me. I'm a guy, 45 years old. I'm a young guy, and now I got to use a cane, and I struggled hard with that. I didn't want to be seen in public.
Oh, you're not alone.
I didn't want to be seen.
You are not alone.
Yeah, and I understand that, and I just hope that I hope that people that are listening to this can just say, don't make the same mistake that I did, and don't let it stop you from doing things. If you can still be a productive part of society and use a walker or a cane or even a wheelchair, then do it. Don't sit in your home and just feel sorry for yourself.
Well, and a lot of that is just because of, societal norms. And it's normal in our society to wear glasses if you can't see. It's normal in our society to wear hearing aids if you can't hear. It's just not as normal, and as, I guess, praised would be that it's not as normal to accept aids for mobility. And there are so many pockets and, so many pockets of places in the disability world that really, I think, are doing such good work and awareness and helping just with that reframe of, this is something that helps me keep going, just like glasses, just like hearing aids or anything else. And again, that just comes back, Brian, to how are we thinking about it? So it all comes back to, what is the story? What is the narrative? And the thoughts that we are assigning to this thing that's happening, because that is going to determine how we feel about it. If we think that a cane or a wheelchair degrades our life or makes our life less than, then we are going to feel terrible and shitty about having to use them. But if we think these help me get further, these help me do the things I still want to do, we're going to look at them and we're going to feel so grateful for them and just excited that they exist.
Yeah, absolutely, Amy. Absolutely. So let me flip over to what you went to school for, Amy, because I know we talked about this a little bit before we recorded, and I said I wanted to touch on this because your expertise is the pharmaceuticals, and you could just kind of take us through your professional opinion on the DMTs. And I know that I asked you the question about, where do you think we are with the cure and just the path being a medical professional in the pharmaceutical field side of it, and where do you think we're going to be with our DMTs and all that?
Sure. I mean, one thing it's kind of interesting to say, and maybe other people can relate, but I am, if you are someone who goes out and Googles things, and you get information, it can either help and empower, or it can really take you down some rabbit holes. And so, well, especially if we're talking misinformation, which most Googling and things like that will give us. But when I was diagnosed, I actually found that really diving deep into the world of MS was a little bit triggering for me. It was a little bit anxiety inducing. What I said to my doctors, what I said to my good friends who worked in the space, who were pharmacists, I said, I need you to treat me like I don't know what these are. I need you to really give me the information I need to know. Now, it's gotten a lot better since then, and I do keep up and am able to have an opinion on what's happening. But there are so many more medications, so many more options available. They're targeting different cells and entire different theologies on how we can help these different forms of MS. And so it is a really inspiring time to have MS. We've made advances, and I could list a million specifics, but there are advances being made. And I think the biggest thing for people listening is that decision to say, am I going to take a medication or not? And the one thing that I always like to ask people and ensure people consider is, are they making the decision based on really good information? So I'll meet people who have decided that medications are toxic and they are just going to, wreck their health in every way, which may not be a completely educated decision, because if you really look at the pros, the cons, the percentage chances of certain things happening, really getting good information, not Google information, good information from your pharmacist, from your doctor, and really looking at making that decision, not from a place of fear, but from a place that really takes into account good quality science and evidence. Because when I ask people, if you had cancer or if someone had cancer, would you take the chemo? And a lot of people, their answer is yes. Like, I absolutely would.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of asking, well, what's the difference here? If this is something that there may be downsides to it, but, the upsides could also be, and I don't want to sound like I'm, persuading people either way, but when we look at the data, there is really good data and outcomes to change the course of MS with what we've been doing, with what pharmaceuticals have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, back when I was 27, my doctor put me on Avonex, and I didn't do really well on that. And there were only, like I said, 3 or 4 DMTs, but I was to the point that, I just wanted something to just like slow this disease down and let me live the best life I could. And, I just submitted to what my doctor suggested. And I know that there's people that they're afraid of those DMTs, but I didn't want to put any of that poison into my body, but I weighed the options. I'm like, okay, well, if you don't do this, then the possibilities of you being in the wheelchair might be a little bit quicker. So that was just the thought process that I had. But I totally get people being afraid of those DMTs because, we are putting poison into our body. And I've heard of people, they have liver problems because of after effects of them, or they might even get diagnosed with cancer. And that could be linked to a DMT. But it's still what is the best alternative than the progression of the disease is the way I looked at it.
Well, yeah. And to be, not to be controversial in any way, but, when we look at things we put in our body, we could also call some foods and some things that we know are not great for us poison. at a certain dose, the dose makes the poison. And so if we look holistically, I like to call our DMTs, I call it my defense strategy. So I know that we both love sports. So it's my defense. It is working in the background. It is in there doing its thing, hopefully to keep progression at bay and to help prevent these future buildup of disability. Now, I like to look at the things that I am putting in my body and consuming, whether it's thoughts, feelings, food, movement, relationships. I love how much you talk about the family piece of it, and that's part of it. Challenges we take on, that's our offense. That is the controllable. When we talk about things we can't control versus things we can, those areas of our lifestyle are the things that we can control. We can control how we think, feel, and what we choose to do, related to our lifestyle. And so we have this defense, I have this offense. And when things start to look gloomy, and when I have a down day, a down week, a down month, it's really like, wait, where is my focus right now? And I find my brain has gone back to looking at the parts I can't control, to looking at the loss, to looking at things that feel hard. And it's just a simple process to redirect. Not that we're saying those things don't exist. I mean, they will always be there, and that's okay. It's just allowing for equal airspace and attention back to the things that do feel good and the things I can control and the things that are going right.
Yeah. I love that, Amy. And I love what you're about and, what I've learned about you and just from our conversations we had and the coaching that you do. Talk a little bit more about that, like the platform that you use, the help that you try to give to people that are in similar situations as us. They're just trying to figure this out. Talk to me about your coaching platform that you do.
Sure. It's been an evolution, and honestly, because I really had to create what I needed. I had to figure this out because there weren't a lot of people out there talking about this in a way that made sense for exactly what I was going through, which was, these diagnoses, this very real reality of what life is like. And so what I'm about to share has really been an evolution over the past almost 10 years of figuring out what works for me. And then over the past 6 years, becoming a coach, going back to school, learning what I could on how do I do this to help others too. And essentially, I love habits. And so a lot of the work I do, I use habits because habits to me, and maybe you as a sports guy will also really resonate with this. We really understand that it's not these grand gestures. It is the small things we do every day that add up over time. They compound and they build interest. And so habits, whether it's in I call them inner habits, so how we habitually think and feel, that's our mindset, or our outer habits. What are we eating? How are we moving? How are we relating to people and family and friends? Habits, if we have better habits, we will have better health. Mental, physical, emotional. It's impossible to not have better health when we focus on slowly building and replacing things that are tearing our body down with things that are helping us heal and helping us feel, think, and do better. Over time. If we trust that process, our bodies are, from a very biochemical standpoint, we're creating new cells every day. And again, when we improve the input, the output gets better. And so the other good thing about habits is that there's a science behind habit change. So if anybody out there is thinking, oh gosh, I've tried that, but eating better is hard and this is hard and I'm just not consistent, that's the BS that I want to, eliminate from people's brains, because it is not a you problem. It is a part of being human that changing is hard. Changing is something that is not natural. You just haven't been taught how to do it yet, how to do it in a way that actually feels good. So my entire mission and the entire thing that I do is help people decide what changes do they want to make, help them connect it to why they would want to make them. And then 1,000%, how do you do it? How do you do it in a way that day in and day out feels good? And you really start to, here's the simplest way to put it. The don't feel terrible about the direction your health is headed. I love people to have hope that, wow, I am doing these things. I'm controlling the things that I can so that I've shifted the trajectory of my health in a way that's positive. And that doesn't mean that we don't, again, have detours and have very real things, but anything we can do to have the best physical, mental, and emotional health we can is what I'm all about.
And sometimes it takes a while to get that figured out. When I went through the process of losing my ability to work and all that, and, you go into the depression, but you got to figure it out. You got to find something that makes you happy. And then you just got to make the adjustments to it and tweak it. And then once you get that pattern, like you said, I'm a pattern person and I'm a habit person. And when I find something that fits in my life and makes me happy, I want that to happen every day. And I try to make it a daily thing. And then when that disappears and it no longer makes me happy, I find something else to replace that.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, you get good at learning what you want and need. And I try to make it really attractive. If you are looking at, oh, do I want to work with Amy? I try to make it really attractive to sign up for a year, because the year is like a beautiful amount of time to give yourself space, to give yourself time to not feel like you're in a rush, but to really learn how to incorporate these things into your everyday life. You don't need extra time. You don't need extra energy. You invest time, energy, money, you invest into something if you believe that you're going to get a positive return on your investment. So I always say that, how are you spending your time, energy, money? Does it feel like you're spending it like it's a cost, or is it an investment? Because you know that in the future, that's going to pay you back. And the other thing that I think that is just, different about my approach is that it's backed on good science. So I think the information overload of the internet is so real that it can paralyze people in terms of not moving forward because they're not quite sure what to do. But when we get misinformation and we act on that, that can be pretty devastating as well. So it's kind of increasing your filter on the amount of information you take in so that you can concentrate more on your role. Like what you said, become aware. What feels good for me? What do I want to do more of? What works with you? And there is a very real process behind developing. There's something called self-efficacy. If anyone out there is a science nerd, they may know what it is. But the best way to describe self-efficacy is it's like that little voice in your head when you're going towards something and it's like rooting you on. It's saying, I can do this. What I do matters. And so what research shows is the higher the self-efficacy, the more productive you are, the healthier you are, the happier you are. And there are some very real ways to boost your self-efficacy. So I created my coaching program. I have a group program that's called the Club or Club Habit Hub. It is designed around these things that we know boost self-efficacy. So again, you don't need to worry about the science or the structure behind it. You can just hopefully trust that I've considered it and I've incorporated it into what we do to give you the best chance of getting the results that you and I both want in this life.
Yeah, I love it, Amy. I will put in the description a link to hook up with you. If anybody wants to reach out to Amy and talk to her about her coaching, I will put that in the link for you, Amy, just to connect with you, because I love what you're about. And the mental health part of this journey is the most important part of it. I think it's more important than the physical part. And just learning tools to how to manage that is just so important. Yeah. And I love what you're doing, and I totally support that. And I will definitely put that link in the description. Is there anything else that you want to add to anything before we wrap it up? Because I know you got to get back to work. You're doing this on a break that you took off. But is there anything else that you want to say to anybody out there that's listening, Amy, before we wrap it up?
Well, first, I just want to thank you for this space, this forum, the work that you're putting in the world. It's, so important. And your I'm just grateful to you. Sharing my work is such a blessing. And like I said, when we find things that we notice, oh God, that feels kind of hopeful, that feels kind of like inspiring or feels positive, we can lean into that. And I know that, people listening to your podcast feel that. And so yeah, I'm grateful to you. And yeah, for everybody else out there, just, to close up how we opened this entire conversation of, we get the diagnosis, we have that instinctual first thought of, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And I just have to say, through the last 14 years, I wanted to shift that into a belief of, my life does not have to be worse because of this thing. And it's not flashy. It doesn't happen overnight. It's a habitual thought that, I've worked on and that you can work on. It didn't start with, oh my gosh, life is great with MS. It started with like this baby bridge thought of, is it possible my life, maybe it's possible my life doesn't have to be worse. And then slowly, stepping my way towards 14 years later, if you tell me, Amy, your life is worse because of MS, I don't believe you. I would argue with you, because I'd say, no, I have built this new habitual thought to believe and find evidence for ways that it's not. So I guess for everybody listening, it really is that the way we think, the way we feel is not set in stone. So, find the spaces that you notice you are thinking and feeling more positive things, and then lean in there. Lean in and realize that those are things we can make habits too. And I just wish that for everybody. I wish that some of that inner peace, no matter what's going on outside, I wish that for everybody listening.
I love it, Amy. I love it. I want to thank you so much. I love everything that you're about, Amy, and I will definitely invite you back on a later date, because I love everything that you have to say, and I really appreciate you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. If anybody, I don't know if you interact with your listeners much, but it's kind of fun to get what questions people still have. Like, well, what about this? And I would be happy to talk about anything specific. That'd be neat.
Absolutely. All right. If you want to follow Amy, I will put that in the description. And if you want to follow me on TikTok, you can find me MS Michigan Man 64. You can also find me on Instagram, MS Michigan Man 64. And I'm on Facebook, Brian Wallace out of Brunswick, Ohio. Please share it out and hit the subscribe button. We want to be understood. The best way to be understood is to listen to us talk. Till the next episode, this is the MS Michigan Man 64. I am out.